Welcome back to Moments That Matter. Our guest this week is Jessica Mussro. Jess has some history with Southern Wesleyan University, first as an undergrad and then on staff. That's when she and I first met. She was working in the counseling office and I was Dean of Education. Following her time at SWU, she worked for the CCCU Middle East Studies program in Amman, Jordan, and she returned to the States and began working in her current position as communications coordinator at American Leprosy Missions in Greenville, South Carolina. Jess recently began a Master of Science degree in International Development from SOAS, University of London. As of last month, she is now a published author, having had her poems included in a contributed volume called The Saving I Need, edited by David Tenson in Australia. Thanks for joining us today, Jess.
Thanks for having me.
So if we track your degrees and certificates as well as your experience, though I know you would probably disagree with this statement, we can definitely see a trajectory from a bachelor in international relations to certificate in international family and community, and now a master in international development. Can you give us an idea of your background, including your growing up?
Where to start with that? Yeah, the word international comes up a lot. I think I should clarify that it only got in there in the first place because I couldn't make up my mind what to major in school. And my advisor had to twist my arm, say, you must choose a degree. I said, but I want 6. He said, that's not allowed. You must choose one. And because we were such a tiny school, and because my advisor was also the director of the Honors College, he did a self-designed major for me, basically so that I could study the Middle East and do a class on women and gender. And so basically my first degree meant that I just did a lot of reading. I had a very British style bachelor's to do this independent research class. Come back when you've read 750 pages. So yes, international was basically an excuse to study everything.
So continuing on that idea, okay, where'd your love for travel and experiencing other cultures come from? Would you say your interest in all things international was something that evolved or a realization you had at some point?
I think it was more of a realization. I really, contrary to my resume, I'm actually a bit of a homebody, and I hate change and I hate new environments. I find it all very disorienting and challenging. And that was oddly enough solidified by moving around a lot growing up. And so instead of adapting to that pattern, I decided I really didn't like it. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I love learning. And I was introduced to the Middle East at an early age. We lived there. We lived in the United Arab Emirates from when I was 9 to when I was 10. And just enough to give you a taste and for it to seem exotic and like an adventure. And I don't think it was until I studied abroad as a senior in college in Cairo, I don't think it was until that point that the transformative power of a new environment and of encountering difference and of really sitting with that and holding it actually hit me. And I realized all the good and all of the personal change that can come from that. And so from that point forward, I became a lot more passionate about those experiences, even if I still found them very uncomfortable.
And you're someone who keeps your finger on the pulse of Middle East politics and economics. Did that come from your time living overseas?
It did. I think in a way it also comes from being a bit of a rebel and a bit of a devil's advocate to whatever environment I find myself in. And I discovered as I was leaving high school and entering university and learning a little bit more about modern Middle East history, I discovered that the church environments I was in had a very specific take on what the modern Middle East meant and had some very strong religious language to justify their positions. And I thought that that was intriguing because it didn't actually line up with the history I was reading. And from 17 onward, I sort of in reaction against what I was what I was surrounded by, I started learning and absorbing information, and yes, the more I learned, and then of course getting to be in Egypt and getting to travel right before the Arab Spring. So the program at the time was able to visit Turkey and then basically drive all the way down through the Levant, drive from Turkey to Syria to Jordan to Israel, Palestine, across the Sinai, back to Egypt. And a year later, that became impossible, as it still basically is. So yeah, all of that has definitely led to that continuing to be a region of interest and something I keep track of.
And you also lived for a time in Amman, yeah?
I did. What year is this? This is 2021. So for 3.5, 4 years ago, I went back to the same program I'd been a student on. It's now located in Amman instead of in Cairo. And I went back to be on-site staff there for the 17-18 academic year. Yeah, that was a whole new country. I'd spent a lot of time studying Jordan, and I hadn't actually spent any time there. So I was very excited.
And so what is your take on living in the Middle East? You had a couple of short stints and then you had a much longer one.
I think that something Americans and Europeans encounter when they're in the Middle East is that people are very gracious with you as an individual and not as a representative of your country's politics. No one likes to discuss politics and conspiracy theories and what they think about them more than people in the Middle East, but they don't tack those on to you as a person, which is incredibly gracious. And so it's an exchange of people having very strong opinions and direct experiences with policies that you're a part of based on your nationality, but also a lot of hospitality and generousness with time and with dinner and with just a whole attitude of hospitality and generosity that is pretty striking.
That's awesome. So I think a lot of people, even those living in the upstate of South Carolina, would not be aware necessarily of American Leprosy Missions being right here in Greenville. Can you tell us a bit about that organization and what you do there?
Yeah, American Leprosy Missions is the oldest and largest U.S. nonprofit that focuses on leprosy or Hansen's disease, and specifically that, but then some of the diseases that are in the same family, so to speak, called neglected tropical diseases or NTDs. Our role is largely partner support and identifying hospitals and organizations in countries that are affected by NTDs and identifying ways to support them and give them the tools they need to do the work that they're doing as effectively as they can. And so that we kind of span the spectrum from molecular biological research that we have a a researcher on staff at the University of Cambridge, and so he and another staff member are very involved in the world of research and new tools for diagnosis. And then it runs the gamut from that to medical shipments yearly to hospitals, and just getting them supplies they need to do the work they're doing. So it's a lot of different things. My role is on the communications side. So I do a lot of writing for our website, and I manage our social media accounts. I edit reports, and I order envelopes when we're out of envelopes. I have a very diverse spectrum of things that fall under my purview. So
that's a pretty key
yeah.
position. Yeah.
Yeah.
So how does ALM fit into the whole scheme of things with regard to your commitment to international development?
ALM is my first foray into the nonprofit world. So my background for the past decade has been in academia and in higher ed. And after I got back from Amman, I was ready to transition from higher ed administration into something else, preferably an NGO or the nonprofit world. And even though I have a pretty transferable set of skills, administratively speaking, it's very hard to break into the nonprofit sphere, because you're competing with people who have been doing the work for so long, who usually have a degree in it. And so it's just hard to move your resume up the pile. And so ALM was my first break into something that was not working for a university. So I'm very grateful for that.
Jess, I know that you and Paul have had opportunity to travel through Jordan and Egypt, and you so much through the Middle East. What was maybe one or maybe a couple really transformative moments that influenced you deeply, that maybe a person or a place or an encounter that really made you come alive in the time that you were over there?
Oh, wow. I love that question. I generally feel more alive when I am back in that region than I do when I'm home. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that I'm never there for very long. I don't have a lot of time for it to become mundane and to become routine. There's a particular place that has been special since I was a student, and I've been lucky enough to get to go back and visit whenever I've been in Egypt. There's a Coptic retreat center 2 or 3 hours south of Cairo called Anaphora, which means in Coptic offering or uplifting, in the way that when you get to the part of a service that involves the Eucharist and someone is lifting up the Eucharist, that it's that term is what Anaphora means. It is out in the middle of the desert. There is nothing nearby for a very long ways in any direction. And it's a farm. It operates as a retreat center. It's run by a core group of Coptic monks and nuns and volunteers who are there at any given time. And I think the reason that it became so special is Cairo is very large and very noisy and very dirty and very crowded. It's also incredible, but it is a lot from a sensory perspective. And the quiet and restfulness at Anaphora, and being able to interact with one of the monks in a leadership role there, Bishop Thomas, has been transformative every time that I've been able to visit and had the opportunity to to hear Bishop Thomas speak or to attend a prayer service. I was there in Egypt during Holy Week once, and so I got to do a Good Friday visit, the all day long Good Friday services at one point. And yeah, that's always a really transformative place and restful, because whenever I'm there, I'm usually coming off of a pretty busy time otherwise. I think in terms of people or other instances that have been meaningful, my first trip to Jerusalem, every time I'm in that area, it's always a whirlwind. It's usually a stack of speakers, one on top of another, and you're struggling to keep up with the information being hosed at you. As a student, we had the opportunity to talk with two people who changed my thinking in a pretty drastic way. One is an Israeli lecturer, and he was, when I was a student and still is with the program, in charge of sort of giving you an overview of modern Israel's civic life and putting the Holocaust in context for the modern state. And he does it in such a tasteful and revelatory way. It completely changes the way you see the country and the people and its policies. That is both kind and also drastic. Basically a society with PTSD. And another meeting that I remember being very impactful is an Episcopal priest, Father Bowen, who we met with one evening. We were all tired and worn out from the day, and he basically just sat with us for a few hours and talked. He had been in Jerusalem for, I forget how long. He had been there for a while, and so it was the opportunity to hear an outsider, kind of who'd been having the experience that we'd had for a week, who'd had that experience for say 10 years. How do you do this? How do you take in this much information and this many different voices and like stay sane? And during the semester, as a group, we had been doing a lot of thinking and writing around religion and faith and the different faith experiences that we were encountering, what we thought of those. And Father Bowen said something that I have held on to ever since. He said, I have no problem with a Jew who wants me to be a Jew or a Muslim who wants me to be Muslim. I think God is greater. And I love that. I love that very much. And I love it especially because God is greater. It translates very well into Arabic and to Hebrew as well.
Thanks for listening to Moments That Matter, a podcast that looks at the moments in our lives that come along from time to time that have consequences long after the moment, especially those moments that have to do with the choice of vocation. In his book, Let Your Life Speak, Listening for the Voice of Vocation, Parker Palmer speaks of a clearness committee in the Quaker tradition, wherein a group of older, wiser people ask questions of someone considering a life choice as a way of clarifying the next step. We may not meet with a committee about these big decisions, but we all have these critical junctures in our lives, which we can think of as clearness committee moments. We need to pay attention to these moments because they are profound and potentially life-altering. We'll relay stories from our lives and interview others about theirs, especially noting the clearness committee moments, those we choose to recognize and those that were sadly ignored, those decisions that were made with God in mind and those that were not. Our hope is that these podcasts will cause you to think of the same kind of moments in your life with new clarity.